Tensions are running deep in Ukraine, even as Russia maintains it's not planning a Ukrainian invasion. Its troops are carrying out area drills just 75 kilometers from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. 2 Russian long-range strategic bombers took part in joint military exercises with Belarusian air forces. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russian strategic bombers conducted maneuvers for approximately 4 hours in Belarusian airspace. The mission came as the Kremlin moved troops from Siberia and the Far East to Belarus for joint military drills. Satellite images taken on Friday show heavy Russian military deployments in southern Belarus, aircraft, troops and air defense systems at military bases in 3 towns. The Kremlin has described the movement of troops a rehearsal for repelling external aggression. The Allied resolve exercises will be running until the 20th of February, and according to Moscow, the forces will withdraw after the drills. Meanwhile, U.S. officials say that Russia has put in place about 70% of the combat power that they believe Moscow would need for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the last 2 weeks, the number of battalion tactical groups in the border region has risen to 83 from 60, and 14 more are in transit by Russian military units. Ukraine is also preparing for a strong defense in case of an invasion. The country received another consignment of weapons from the United States as part of defensive aid totaling $200 million. Now, as NATO looks to reinforce its eastern flank, senior members of the U.S. military arrived in Poland. The military deployment is part of the Western Allies' reaction to Russia's military presence near the Ukrainian border. On Wednesday, U.S. had announced the deployment of nearly 3,000 American troops to Eastern Europe in the coming days. Around 1,700 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division are due to be stationed in Poland on a temporary basis. The U.S. already has about 4,500 troops in Poland in both a NATO and a bilateral capacity. Europe is scrambling to intercept the conflict. Ahead of traveling to Moscow and Kyiv, French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with NATO head Jens Stoltenberg about the Ukraine crisis. During the talks, Macron insisted on finding a path to de-escalation through dialogue. The French president will visit Moscow on Monday and hold talks with his Russian counterpart, after which he will head to Kyiv and meet with Zelensky. Well, for more updates on this, our executive editor Palki Sharma is joining us live from Ground Zero. Hello, Palki, and good to see you. Welcome to this broadcast. New U.S. intelligence assessments claim that Russia has completed preparation for large-scale invasion. I know you have asked this question to several people in Ukraine, but having been in the front line for the past 3 days and even 2 at the border, in your assessment, what is the real situation on ground? Is a war brewing or likely to happen?
Is a war likely to happen? The answer to this question, I think, is with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Intelligence assessments from the US and elsewhere say that Putin's forces are going to be ready for any eventuality. They're looking at multiple options, a full-scale invasion or a limited incursion. Either way, they want to be prepared. The US intelligence believes that for a full-scale invasion, the Russians need 150,000 odd troops, and they believe that 70% of that deployment is already complete. Like I told you earlier, a very dire prediction coming from the US, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mike Milley, who said that Kyiv could fall within 72 hours and if there is an invasion, and the civilian casualties, according to the American assessment, is anywhere between 25 to 50,000, and they've also predicted a high number of casualty figure for Ukrainian troops in case of a full-blown war. So that's what the Americans are predicting. The Russians, of course, keeping their cards close to their chest and not saying very much, apart from the fact that what they've insisted throughout, that they do not plan to invade, but their actions do not inspire a lot of confidence. I'll give you one more example. There is a strategic exercise, nuclear exercise that the Russians conduct every year in autumn, and this time that exercise, we believe, has been moved to February, March. So the Americans are looking at this window, mid-February to March, as the time for a possible invasion, and this has become a point of controversy in Washington D.C. because as the U.S. keeps dishing out what they call their intelligence assessment, they've not given any proof to substantiate how they arrived at those figures and those assessments.
We can see several people have come out in support of Ukraine behind you. Have you managed to speak to some of them, and who are they voicing their anger or frustrations to?
Well, they're very angry with the Russians. That thing is very, very clear. They say that Ukraine is a sovereign nation and Ukraine has every right to exert its sovereignty, to express it, and to choose its own path, to determine its own path. If it wants to join the NATO, there should be nothing and nobody stopping Ukraine from joining the NATO. We've spoken to many people here, and they came out in sub-zero temperatures. It's been snowing intermittently here in the city of Kyiv, but we saw people of all ages, all nationalities come here and wave their flags, including a lot of people from India and the US and Canada, among others, singing the Ukrainian national anthem and chanting "Long live Ukraine." And we subsequently spoke to many of them who said that what the Russians are doing is absolutely unacceptable. They're also indulging in charity. They are collecting money for the Ukrainian troops. Should the eventuality arise, should there be a war, they want their country to be prepared monetarily and otherwise to take on the invaders.
This may sound ironical, but the Ukrainian presidency has just issued a statement and said that the chance of a diplomatic solution is higher than military escalation. Russian ambassador to Washington has also insisted that Russia is not planning to attack Ukraine, like you said there. What do you make of this? Some truce in the offing, perhaps?
I think a lot of these statements are basically part assessment and part wishful thinking, I think, for want of a better expression. The Ukrainians do not want a war. The Ukrainians know that despite all the preparation and all the military drills that they're conducting, they're no match really for the Russian forces. And the American assessments, like we just discussed, have said as much. They've said in case of a full-blown invasion, no matter how many troops the Americans are sending, all of the NATO deployments, all of the sending of weapons and equipment, they've said that Kyiv will fall within 72 hours. And I think those who sit in the government in Kyiv also realize that, which is why they do not want a war, which is why the government here in Ukraine is hoping that diplomacy will deliver and it won't come to a war. And they're really banking, I believe, on their European partners to be able to talk to the Russians and find a middle path.
My final question to you, Palki, will the forays made by leaders from France and Britain yield any impact in de-escalating the tensions in the region?
Sorry, you'll have to repeat that question, Eric. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. There's a lot of noise around me.
I said, will the forays made by leaders from France and Britain yield any impact in de-escalating the tensions in the region?
If I heard you correctly, will the talks make an impact in de-escalating the situation? We hope so. On the plus side, talks have continued despite all the deployments, despite all the ratcheting of tensions and the threat of sanctions. Talks have continued even between Moscow and Washington D.C., so that's a positive sign. On the minus side, talks have not delivered anything, and Russia has made demands which the West finds absolutely unacceptable, and Russia does not want to change its demands, and the West does not want to deliver on those demands. So it's a classic stalemate, as we've been seeing. But we do hope that talks deliver, and we are going to see two of the tallest leaders of Europe go to Moscow in the week ahead to try and figure out some sort of an equation. But there's another question that people here in Ukraine ask, and that is that even if Ukraine were to freeze its bid for a NATO membership for a decade, would that mean that the Russians would back off? and let Ukraine be? Or would that still mean that the Russians will try and impose their will on Kyiv? And that is a question I think that all sides in this conflict need to find an answer to. Is the NATO membership bid of Ukraine just a pretext for Russia to assert itself, or is it the only reason why Russia is doing what it is?
Live from Kyiv, Ukraine, WION Executive Editor Palki Sharma. Thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.